It's been 9 years since we lost actor and comedian Zak Williams, who died by suicide back in 2014. Among those most deeply impacted by his death was his son, Zak. He was in Tyler today to share his story of healing.
9 years after his father's death, Zak Williams is on a mission, using his story to help others heal.
I had a specific stigma associated with mental health, and when I actually started identifying my relationship with stigma, I realized I needed to find ways to share my story.
Speaking at a luncheon benefiting the Alzheimer's Alliance of Smith County, he focused primarily on those who care for others, often neglecting their own mental health.
We need to establish ways in which we're prioritizing mental hygiene on a daily basis. And often we can forget about that because we're so focused on supporting others in need.
Zak's work as a mental health advocate started with his own experience, recognizing past trauma and finding ways to heal.
I was diagnosed with complex PTSD, generalized anxiety disorder, and depression, and I discovered that through service I could start healing the trauma and focusing on myself through things like mental hygiene.
Zak's appearance at today's Butterfly Hope Luncheon was also personal. After his father's death in 2014, an autopsy revealed the actor was suffering from an incurable brain disease called Lewy body dementia, a disease already taking its toll. Zak would later say he could see his dad slowly drifting. Now, as he travels the country helping others, it is his father's legacy of service that inspires him.
When it comes to thinking about my father, I think about his good works. He was so focused on helping people laugh, helping people discover more about themselves and the human condition. And he was also very focused on charitable activity. That was something that was very meaningful to him, and so that's often how I think of him.
Now, money raised at today's luncheon will help support the Alzheimer's Alliance and programs they offer, like counseling, support groups, and education for those living with dementia and also their caretakers.